I'm Harmony Blake, 28 years old, and I'll never forget the moment the auctioneer's gavel came down with that final, thunderous crack. Sold to bidder number 47 for $15 million. The elite Aspen estate auction hall fell into stunned silence as hundreds of wealthy bidders turned to stare at me. But it wasn't their shocked faces that made my heart race with satisfaction. It was the absolute horror spreading across my stepmother Victoria's perfectly Botoxed features, the way my half-sister Celeste's champagne flute slipped from her manicured fingers, and how my stepbrother Trevor's jaw literally dropped open like a fish gasping for air. 6 months ago, they had laughed when I said I'd buy this place. Before we dive into how I turned their mockery into my ultimate victory, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated by family, and don't forget to subscribe because this story of revenge and redemption is just getting started. Trust me, you won't believe what my so-called family put me through next. To understand how I ended up bidding against my own family for a $15 million estate, you need to know about the twisted dynamics that had been poisoning my life for years. My father, William Blake, had been a successful real estate developer who built his fortune from nothing, working his way up from construction sites to boardrooms. When I was 16, he married Victoria Whitmore, a stunning socialite 20 years his junior, who came with 2 children from her previous marriage. What I didn't realize then was that Victoria had targeted my father specifically for his wealth, conducting what amounted to a calculated siege on a lonely widower's heart. Victoria Whitmore was the kind of woman who could smile sweetly while sliding a knife between your ribs. She had platinum blonde hair that never moved out of place, designer clothes that cost more than most people's cars, and eyes as cold as Arctic ice despite their brilliant blue color. She treated charm like a weapon, deploying it strategically to get exactly what she wanted from every situation. From the moment she moved into our family home, she began systematically erasing every trace of my mother's memory and influence, replacing family photos and redecorating rooms until the house felt foreign to me. My half-sister, Celeste, was Victoria's biological daughter with my father, born just 2 years after their marriage. At 25, she was everything Victoria had groomed her to be. Beautiful, entitled, and completely convinced that the world owed her everything simply because she existed. Celeste had inherited Victoria's stunning looks and her father's business acumen, but she used both purely for personal gain. She treated our father's love like a credit card with no spending limit, constantly demanding expensive gifts, luxury vacations, and funding for whatever whim struck her fancy. She had never worked a day in her life, viewing employment as something beneath her station. Then there was Trevor Whitmore, Victoria's son from her first marriage, who was 30 years old and still living off family money. Trevor was tall and handsome in a generic country club way, but his good looks couldn't mask his fundamental laziness and entitlement. He had been given every advantage in life, from private schools to business connections, but he squandered them all through poor decisions and a complete inability to commit to anything that required actual effort. He started and abandoned businesses with the regularity of most people changing clothes, always convinced that success should come without sacrifice. The crown jewel of my father's real estate empire was a magnificent estate nestled in the Colorado Rockies, just outside Aspen. The property sprawled across 50 acres of pristine mountain landscape, featuring a main house that looked like something from a fairy tale, with stone walls, soaring timber beams, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the breathtaking mountain views. My father had purchased the land when I was just 10 years old, spending years personally overseeing every detail of the construction. He used to take me there during the building process, explaining his vision for creating a family legacy that would endure for generations. The estate wasn't just a house to my father. It was his masterpiece, his love letter to the mountains he had grown up exploring as a child. He had installed hiking trails throughout the property, built a private lake for fishing, and even constructed a small chapel where he hoped his grandchildren might one day be married. Every room told a story, from the library filled with his favorite books to the workshop where he still liked to build furniture with his own hands. He made me promise that no matter what happened, I would ensure the estate remained in our family forever. But Victoria had very different plans for the property. Within months of my father's death 2 years ago, she began dropping hints about selling the estate to fund what she called more practical investments. She wanted to use the money to pay for Celeste's elaborate wedding to some investment banker she had been dating for 6 months, and to finance Trevor's latest business venture, which involved importing luxury cars he knew nothing about. When I reminded her of father's wishes, Victoria would smile that cold smile and remind me that as his widow, she now controlled all family decisions. The family meetings became increasingly hostile as Victoria made her intentions clear. They would gather in the formal dining room of our father's main house in Denver, seated around the massive mahogany table where we had once shared family dinners. Victoria would sit at the head of the table in father's chair, flanked by Celeste and Trevor, while I was relegated to the far end like an unwanted guest. They would discuss the estate's future as if I wasn't even present, making plans for spending the sale proceeds while completely ignoring my protests about honoring father's memory. Victoria's treatment of me had always been subtle but vicious, designed to make me feel unwelcome in my own family without appearing overtly cruel to outsiders. She would exclude me from family photos, forget to invite me to important events, and constantly make comments about how I was different from the rest of them. She had a particular talent for making me feel like an intruder in my own childhood home, rearranging rooms and changing traditions until everything familiar had been erased. The breaking point came during a family meeting at father's lawyer's office 6 months before the auction. Jerome Patterson had been handling the Blake family legal affairs for over a decade, and I had always trusted him to honor my father's wishes. The meeting was supposed to be a routine discussion about estate planning, but what I discovered there changed everything I thought I knew about my family and my father's final months. Jerome's office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown Denver high-rise, with panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains stretching to the horizon. The conference room was decorated in rich leather and dark wood, designed to project success and stability. Victoria arrived dressed in a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her jewelry sparkling under the crystal chandelier. Celeste wore a flowing designer dress that screamed expensive, while Trevor showed up in his typical uniform of perfectly pressed khakis and a polo shirt that somehow made him look both privileged and lazy. As Jerome began reviewing the estate documents, I felt my world tilting on its axis. The will that he read bore little resemblance to the conversations I had shared with my father during his final months. According to the legal documents, my father had left the vast majority of his estate to Victoria, including full ownership of the Aspen property and complete discretion over its future. I received only the small tech consulting business I had built while helping father modernize his company's computer systems, along with a modest savings account that wouldn't even cover a year's living expenses. When I challenged the will's contents, Jerome produced medical records suggesting that my father had been suffering from early-stage dementia during his final year, making all his previous promises about the estate legally meaningless. Victoria sat there with an expression of fake sympathy, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a designer handkerchief while explaining how difficult it had been to watch my father's mental decline. She painted herself as the devoted wife who had protected him from making confused decisions about his legacy. The cruel masterpiece of Victoria's manipulation became clear when Jerome revealed the timeline of the will's changes. Every modification had been made during my father's hospital stays, when I had been traveling for work and unable to visit him daily. Victoria had isolated him from family and friends, convincing him that I was too busy with my own life to care about his welfare. She had systematically poisoned his mind against me while presenting herself as his only loyal companion during his darkest hours. When I demanded to see my father's medical records, Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating predator beneath her grieving widow facade. "Harmony, dear," she said with venomous sweetness, "I understand this is difficult for you to accept, but your father's priorities changed as he got older. He realized that Celeste and Trevor needed more guidance and support than you do. You've always been so independent, so capable of taking care of yourself." Celeste, who had been silent throughout the meeting, suddenly erupted into cruel laughter that echoed off the conference room's paneled walls. "Honestly, Harmony, Did you really think Daddy would leave you enough money to maintain a place like the estate? You could never afford it anyway. You're not really family like Trevor and I are. You're just his daughter from before, when he was still figuring out what he really wanted in life." Her words hit me like physical blows, each syllable designed to inflict maximum damage on my already shattered heart. Trevor, emboldened by his sister's cruelty, leaned back in his leather chair with a smug expression. "Let's be realistic here, Harmony. Your little computer business is cute and all, but it's not exactly Goldman Sachs. You're talking about a $15 million property. That's serious money, not something you play around with when you're fixing people's laptops for a living." He gestured dismissively at my conservative business attire, making it clear that he viewed me as fundamentally inferior to their family's social status. Victoria's cutting remarks were delivered with surgical precision, each word carefully chosen to destroy my confidence and sense of belonging. "Sweetheart, I think you're suffering from some delusions of grandeur here. The estate requires millions of dollars in annual maintenance, property taxes that would bankrupt most people, and a level of social responsibility that, frankly, you're not equipped to handle. Your father understood that some legacies require a certain kind of person to preserve them properly." Jerome Patterson, who I had trusted as a family friend, revealed his true allegiances when he began supporting Victoria's version of events with carefully prepared legal documents. Every question I raised about the will's authenticity was met with more paperwork designed to prove my father's mental incompetence during our final conversations. Jerome had been paid handsomely to facilitate Victoria's theft, and he performed his role with the cold efficiency of a hired assassin. The meeting deteriorated further when I made an emotional plea about preserving father's memory through the estate he had loved so much. I reminded them of his stories about building the property by hand, his dreams of family gatherings in the main house, and his explicit wishes that the estate remain in the Blake family for future generations. My voice cracked as I described finding him there during his final weeks, sitting by the lake and talking about the grandchildren he hoped would one day play on those same shores. Victoria's response was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. She claimed that selling the estate was actually honoring father's memory by ensuring that his resources were used to build successful futures for his children. "William would want us to be practical," she declared with fake sincerity. "He built his fortune by making smart financial decisions, not by clinging sentimentally to expensive property that serves no real purpose." As I stormed out of Jerome's office, my heart breaking and my mind reeling from the betrayal, I heard Celeste's laughter following me down the hallway. "Don't take it so personally, Harmony," she called out mockingly. "Some people are just born to be employees, not owners." Those words burned themselves into my memory, fueling a determination I didn't even know I possessed. Standing in the parking garage beside my modest Honda Civic, surrounded by luxury cars that cost more than my annual income, I made a decision that would change everything. I would find a way to save the estate, not just for my father's memory, but to prove that Victoria and her children had underestimated me in the most catastrophic way possible. They wanted to see what my little computer business could really accomplish, and I was going to show them exactly what happened when you pushed Harmony Blake too far. The morning after that devastating meeting, I woke up in my small Denver apartment with a clarity I had never experienced before. While Victoria and her children celebrated their anticipated windfall, I began plotting the most ambitious business expansion of my career. My tech consulting company, Blake Digital Solutions, had been operating successfully for 3 years, but it was time to transform it from a modest local business into something that could challenge my family's assumptions about my capabilities. I threw myself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsession, arriving at my office before dawn and staying until well past midnight. My company specialized in helping traditional businesses modernize their technology infrastructure, and I had built a reputation for solving complex problems that other consultants couldn't handle. But instead of gradually growing the business as I had planned, I began pursuing contracts that were far beyond my previous scope, targeting major corporations that needed comprehensive digital transformations. My first breakthrough came when Nathan Cross, an ambitious real estate developer with projects across the Mountain West region, hired me to design a revolutionary property management system. Nathan was exactly the kind of man my stepfamily would approve of: tall, handsome, Harvard-educated, and worth approximately $50 million. He drove a Tesla Model S, wore custom-tailored suits, and had the kind of confidence that came from never experiencing real failure. What made him perfect for my purposes was his complete lack of loyalty to anyone except himself. The project with Nathan's company required me to work 18-hour days for 3 months straight, designing software that could manage everything from tenant applications to maintenance requests across hundreds of properties. I sacrificed my social life completely, canceling plans with friends and ignoring my boyfriend Derek's complaints about my unavailability. Every spare moment was devoted to perfecting the system, because I knew this contract could be worth millions if I executed it perfectly. While I focused on building my business empire, Victoria began her campaign to sell the estate below market value to ensure a quick transaction. She had found a buyer through her social connections, a Texas oil executive who wanted the property as a weekend retreat and was willing to pay $12 million for a quick closing. The price was $3 million below the property's actual market value, but Victoria didn't care because it would still provide enough money for her children's immediate needs. I secretly contacted Harrison Mills, one of Colorado's most respected property appraisers, to get an independent evaluation of the estate's true worth. Harrison was a gruff man in his 60s who had built his reputation on absolute honesty, even when his assessments disappointed his clients. When he completed his analysis, he confirmed that the estate was worth at least $15 million, possibly more given the current real estate market trends and the property's unique features. Armed with this information, I began developing a strategy to acquire the capital I would need to outbid Victoria's buyer. My work with Nathan Cross was generating substantial revenue, but I needed to accelerate the timeline dramatically. I started taking on multiple projects simultaneously, subcontracting parts of the work to freelancers while maintaining strict quality control over every deliverable. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, and I survived on coffee, determination, and the burning desire to prove my family wrong. However, Victoria wasn't content to simply sell the estate and move on with her life. She had noticed my increased business activity and correctly deduced that I might be planning some kind of challenge to her authority. Her response was to launch a subtle but vicious campaign designed to undermine my reputation and destroy my client relationships. She began spreading rumors through her extensive social network about my emotional instability and financial desperation, painting me as someone who couldn't be trusted with important business responsibilities. The rumors started small but grew more damaging over time. Victoria told people at country club events that I had been acting erratically since father's death, making poor decisions, and becoming increasingly isolated from family and friends. She claimed that my sudden business expansion was evidence of manic behavior, suggesting that I was taking on more work than I could handle and would inevitably disappoint my clients. Celeste took the attack to another level by targeting my personal relationships. She had always resented Derek, my boyfriend of 2 years, viewing him as beneath our family's social standards because he was a high school teacher rather than a businessman or a professional. She began inviting Derek to family events when she knew I would be working, slowly convincing him that I was prioritizing money over our relationship. Her manipulation was subtle but effective, playing on Derek's existing insecurities about dating someone from a wealthier family. Trevor's contribution to the family's assault on my life was typically blunt and stupid. He started approaching my existing clients at business networking events, claiming that he could provide better services through his connections in the business community. Trevor had no understanding of technology or business management, but he compensated for his ignorance with aggressive confidence and the Blake family name. Several clients were confused by his interference, wondering if there were internal conflicts within my company that might affect their projects. As my business continued to grow despite my family's sabotage efforts, my bank account balance climbed steadily toward the $8 million mark. I was operating multiple revenue streams simultaneously, the property management system for Nathan Cross, a complete IT overhaul for a regional hospital chain, and a cybersecurity project for a growing financial services company. Each project required perfect execution because any failure would destroy my reputation and eliminate my chances of acquiring the estate. The pressure was beginning to take a physical toll on my health. I lost 15 pounds because I forgot to eat regular meals. My hands developed a persistent tremor from too much caffeine, and dark circles under my eyes made me look like I hadn't slept in months. But every time I felt like collapsing, I would remember Celeste's cruel laughter and Trevor's dismissive comments, and somehow find the energy to continue working. The anonymous, threatening messages began arriving in my email inbox and through my apartment building's mail slot during my 4th month of intensive work. The notes were carefully worded to avoid explicit threats while making their message clear. I should abandon my business expansion plans and accept my designated role within the family hierarchy. Some people need to learn to stay in their lane, read one message. Ambitious little girls often get hurt when they reach too high, warned another. I suspected that Trevor was behind the messages because they matched his crude intimidation style, but I couldn't prove it without involving law enforcement and potentially derailing my business plans. Instead, I installed security cameras in my apartment building and began varying my daily routines to make myself a more difficult target for harassment. The threats actually strengthened my resolve, proving that my family was genuinely worried about my growing financial power. By the end of my 4th month of relentless work, I had managed to accumulate nearly $8 million in liquid assets, a sum that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. But I still needed $7 million more to match the estate's market value, and Victoria was pushing for a closing date that would occur within 8 weeks. The math was daunting, but I had learned that impossible goals became achievable when you refuse to accept any alternative to success. As my tech empire approached the $8 million mark and word of my success began spreading through Denver's business community, my family realized that I posed a genuine threat to their estate sale plans. Victoria's response was swift, vicious, and more coordinated than anything I had imagined her capable of orchestrating. What followed was a calculated assault on every aspect of my life, designed to destroy not just my business, but my entire reputation and future prospects. The attack began with a sophisticated disinformation campaign that demonstrated just how well connected Victoria had become during her marriage to my father. She leveraged every social relationship, every country club membership, and every charity board position to spread a carefully crafted narrative about my alleged criminal behavior. The story she told was both believable and devastating. I was supposedly embezzling money from my tech consulting clients to fund a desperate attempt to outbid my own family for property that rightfully belonged to them. Victoria's version of events painted me as a troubled young woman who had never accepted my father's marriage and was now seeking revenge against his widow and children. She claimed that my business expansion was funded through illegal means, possibly involving money laundering or tax evasion schemes that would eventually land me in federal prison. The beauty of her lies was that they contained just enough truth to be credible. I was indeed accumulating money rapidly and planning to bid against my family at the estate auction. The rumors spread through Denver's social elite with the speed and destructiveness of a wildfire. Within 2 weeks, I started noticing changes in how people responded to my business calls and meeting requests. Clients who had been enthusiastic about working with me suddenly became unavailable or postponed projects indefinitely. Networking events that had once been productive became uncomfortable gauntlets, where conversations died when I approached groups of potential clients. Celeste took the campaign to a more personal level by systematically destroying my relationship with Nathan Cross, the real estate developer whose projects had become my most valuable revenue source. She began appearing at the same social events Nathan attended, using her stunning looks and practiced charm to capture his attention. Celeste was a master of manipulation disguised as flirtation, making Nathan feel like the most important man in the room while subtly planting seeds of doubt about my business practices and mental stability. The seduction was methodical and ruthless. Celeste would arrive at charity galas and business mixers, wearing designer gowns that showcased her perfect figure, her platinum hair styled to catch the light just so, her makeup applied with professional precision. She had inherited Victoria's ability to make any man feel like he was the center of her universe, and Nathan was no exception to her powers. Within 3 weeks, she had convinced him to break our partnership agreement and pursue a romantic relationship with her instead. Nathan's betrayal was particularly painful because I had genuinely respected his business acumen and thought we were building something significant together. When he called to terminate our contract, he wouldn't even explain his reasoning clearly, mumbling something about changed priorities and new directions for his company. I later discovered that Celeste had convinced him I was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous, claiming that I had been making inappropriate advances toward him while harboring delusions about our business relationship. Trevor's contribution to the family's war effort was typically crude but effective. He used his connections in the Denver business community to spread rumors about my financial practices, suggesting that my rapid business growth was evidence of illegal activity. Trevor had never understood technology or legitimate business practices, so his accusations were often absurd, but they didn't need to be accurate to damage my reputation. He told people I was running some kind of cryptocurrency scam, manipulating stock prices, or accepting payments from foreign governments for unnamed services. The most devastating blow came when Jerome Patterson, the family lawyer who had already betrayed my father's trust, used his legal connections to freeze several of my father's remaining assets that I had been counting on for emergency funding. Jerome claimed that there were questions about the legitimacy of some financial transfers my father had made before his death, requiring a complete audit before any assets could be distributed to beneficiaries. The freeze effectively trapped an additional $3 million that I needed to reach my $15 million goal. Victoria's culminating move was to orchestrate the collapse of my largest remaining contract with the regional hospital chain. She had discovered that one of the hospital board members was married to her tennis partner, providing her with the perfect opportunity to plant doubts about my company's reliability. Victoria told a carefully constructed story about how my emotional problems were affecting my work quality, suggesting that the hospital system would be taking a significant risk by entrusting their cybersecurity infrastructure to someone who might not complete the project. The hospital contract cancellation came with only 48 hours' notice, citing concerns about vendor stability and project timelines that had supposedly emerged during routine background checks. The loss of that revenue stream reduced my liquid assets by nearly $2 million and left several of my subcontracted employees without income. More importantly, the sudden cancellation sent ripples through the Denver business community, confirming the rumors about my alleged instability and unreliability. My personal life continued to deteriorate as Derek finally succumbed to Celeste's manipulation and ended our relationship. The breakup occurred during what was supposed to be a romantic dinner at our favorite restaurant, but Derek spent the entire evening questioning my priorities and suggesting that I was becoming someone he didn't recognize. He claimed that my obsession with business success was changing my personality, making me cold and calculating like the family members I claimed to despise. Derek's departure left me completely isolated from emotional support at precisely the moment when I needed it most. My friendships had already suffered because of my intensive work schedule, and now, even my romantic relationship had been destroyed by my family's interference. I found myself spending 18-hour days alone in my office, surrounded by the evidence of my business empire, but feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The discovery of hidden recording devices in my apartment building's common areas revealed just how far my family was willing to go in their efforts to destroy me. The devices were sophisticated and professionally installed, suggesting that Victoria had hired private investigators or security consultants to monitor my activities. When I found the recordings, I realized that my family had been documenting my work schedule, my visitor patterns, and possibly even my phone conversations for weeks. The recording that changed everything captured Victoria, Celeste, and Trevor celebrating what they believed was my imminent defeat. Victoria's voice was clear and triumphant as she declared, "She'll never recover from this. By the time we're finished with her, Harmony won't be able to get a job managing a coffee shop, let alone bidding against us for Father's estate. Some people need to be taught their place in the world, and we're providing her with a very expensive education." Listening to my family celebrate my destruction was the final motivation I needed to fight back with everything I had. Their cruelty had finally crossed the line from manipulation into something approaching evil, and I realized that defeating them wasn't just about saving the estate anymore. It was about proving that their entire worldview was fundamentally wrong, that success belonged to people who earned it rather than people who inherited it. By the sixth month of my campaign to save the estate, my business had been reduced to a handful of loyal clients who either hadn't heard the rumors or didn't believe them. My bank account, which had once swelled to nearly $8 million, had dropped to just over $4 million as contracts were canceled and payments were delayed indefinitely. The magnificent tech empire I had built was crumbling around me, and Victoria's coordinated assault on my reputation seemed to be achieving its intended effect. The physical toll of 6 months of 18-hour workdays and constant stress was becoming impossible to ignore. I had lost nearly 20 pounds from my already slender frame, making my clothes hang loosely and my face appear gaunt and hollow. My hands shook constantly from a combination of caffeine addiction and nervous exhaustion, making it difficult to type on my computer keyboard for extended periods. Dark circles under my eyes had deepened into bruises that no amount of concealer could hide, and my hair had begun falling out in small clumps from stress. My apartment lease was terminated with 30 days' notice after Victoria used her influence with my landlord, a prominent Denver businessman who belonged to the same country club as her late husband. The official reason given was lifestyle conflicts with other residents, but I knew the truth was that Victoria had convinced him I was a financial risk and potentially dangerous to other tenants. Finding a new apartment proved nearly impossible as reference checks revealed the rumors about my alleged criminal behavior and mental instability. The isolation was becoming unbearable as former friends avoided my phone calls and declined invitations to meet for coffee or dinner. People who had once sought my advice on technology issues now treated me like I was contagious, crossing the street to avoid conversations and responding to my messages with awkward silence. The business networking events that had once been productive became exercises in public humiliation as conversations stopped when I entered rooms and potential clients made excuses to leave rather than discuss projects with me. My health deteriorated to the point where I was having panic attacks several times per day, my heart racing and my breathing becoming shallow as the weight of my situation crashed down on me repeatedly. I couldn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time, my mind racing through possible solutions and worst-case scenarios until exhaustion finally forced me into brief periods of unconsciousness. Food had lost all taste and appeal, and I survived primarily on protein bars and coffee because preparing actual meals required energy I no longer possessed. The lowest point came when I seriously considered abandoning everything and leaving Colorado entirely. I researched job opportunities in other states, thinking that perhaps I could start over somewhere that Victoria's influence couldn't reach me. The idea of admitting defeat and allowing my family to win felt like spiritual death, but the alternative seemed to be actual physical death from stress and exhaustion. I spent an entire weekend in my apartment, curtains drawn and phone disconnected, contemplating whether the fight was worth the price I was paying. It was during this dark night of the soul that I remembered something my father had mentioned during one of our final conversations. He had been talking about protecting important documents and assets from people who might try to take advantage of his illness, and he had made a cryptic comment about insurance policies that would ensure his true wishes were honored. I had assumed he was speaking metaphorically, but desperation made me reconsider his words more literally. The discovery of my father's hidden safe deposit box at a small community bank across town felt like finding buried treasure when I had resigned myself to poverty. The bank manager, an elderly woman who had known my father for decades, remembered his specific instructions about granting me access to the box if anything ever happened to him. Inside, I found documents that would have destroyed Victoria's claims about the estate even before the legal challenges began. The most damning evidence was a series of letters my father had written during his final months, documenting Victoria's increasing control over his daily activities and her pressure to change his will. The letters were written in his own handwriting, dated and witnessed, describing how Victoria had isolated him from friends and family while manipulating him during periods of medication-induced confusion. He had suspected that Victoria might try to steal his legacy from his daughter, and he had created an insurance policy to prevent it. Hidden beneath the letters were copies of my father's original will, medical records that contradicted the dementia diagnosis Jerome Patterson had presented, and audio recordings of conversations between my father and Victoria where she explicitly discussed her plans to sell the estate against his wishes. The recordings revealed that my father had been far more mentally competent during his final months than Victoria had claimed, and that his changes to the will had been made under duress rather than from confusion or illness. The most precious document in the collection was a letter addressed specifically to me, written in my father's careful handwriting during the week before his death. "My dearest Harmony," it began, "if you are reading this, then my suspicions about Victoria's intentions were correct. I want you to know that everything I ever told you about preserving our family's legacy was true, and that I never stopped believing in your ability to protect what we built together. Don't let them destroy what we built together, sweetheart. You're stronger than they know, and smarter than they'll ever be." Along with the emotional vindication came financial resources I had forgotten about. $3 million in assets that my father had protected from Victoria's manipulation by placing them in accounts she didn't know existed. The money had been earning interest for 2 years, bringing the total to nearly $3.5 million. Combined with my remaining business assets, I suddenly had access to almost $8 million, putting the $15 million estate auction within reach if I could rebuild my business quickly enough. The letter concluded with specific instructions about using the evidence to expose Victoria's crimes and reclaim my rightful inheritance. My father had anticipated every aspect of Victoria's strategy, from the will manipulation to the reputation destruction, and he had provided me with the tools necessary to fight back. "Remember, darling," his final paragraph read, "the only way to defeat someone who fights dirty is to fight smarter. Don't let anger make you stupid, but don't let mercy make you weak." Reading my father's words in that small bank office, surrounded by the evidence of Victoria's betrayal and my father's enduring love, I felt something rekindling inside my chest that I had thought was permanently extinguished. It wasn't just hope returning. It was a cold, calculating fury that would fuel my counterattack against the family that had underestimated me so catastrophically. They wanted to see what Harmony Blake was really capable of when pushed beyond her limits, and my father's final gift had given me exactly the weapons I needed to show them. Armed with my father's evidence and renewed determination, I began the most methodical and ruthless campaign of my life. But this time, I wasn't just defending myself against my family's attacks. I was going on the offensive with weapons they didn't know I possessed. The first phase of my counterattack focused on exposing Victoria's will manipulation while simultaneously rebuilding my business empire under a completely new identity. I started by approaching Miranda Chen, Denver's most respected investigative journalist, who had built her career on exposing corruption among the city's elite families. Miranda was a small, intense woman in her 40s who dressed in simple black clothing and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never met a story she couldn't crack. Her articles had brought down corrupt politicians, exposed money laundering operations, and revealed tax evasion schemes that had resulted in federal prosecutions. The meeting with Miranda took place in a small coffee shop in an unfashionable part of downtown Denver, far from the social circles where Victoria's influence could interfere. I presented her with copies of my father's letters, the audio recordings of Victoria's conversations, and the medical records that contradicted the dementia diagnosis. Miranda's eyes lit up as she reviewed the evidence, recognizing immediately that this story could be the biggest scandal of her career. Miranda's investigation revealed that Victoria's manipulation of my father's will was just the tip of an iceberg that included tax fraud, charity embezzlement, and bribery of public officials. Victoria had been using her position on various nonprofit boards to funnel money into personal accounts, claiming the funds were for charitable purposes while actually using them to maintain her luxurious lifestyle. The scope of her corruption was staggering, involving millions of dollars and dozens of victims who had trusted her with their donations. While Miranda worked on building an airtight case against Victoria, I used my father's protected assets to create a new business identity that would allow me to operate without interference from my family's reputation destruction campaign. Blake Digital Solutions became Harmony Consulting Group, a technology firm supposedly based in Phoenix, but actually operating from a new office I rented under an assumed name in a different part of Denver. The shell company strategy allowed me to pursue contracts with clients who had never heard of Harmony Blake or the rumors surrounding my alleged mental instability. Within 6 weeks, I had signed agreements worth nearly $4 million with companies in Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, all of whom were impressed by my technical expertise and competitive pricing. The work was demanding, but I had learned to manage my time and energy more efficiently during my months of crisis. My investigation into Trevor's activities revealed vulnerabilities that I could exploit to destabilize my family's united front against me. Trevor's latest business venture, the luxury car import operation, was actually a front for a gambling addiction that had spiraled completely out of control. He owed nearly $2 million to various casinos in Las Vegas and was being pressured by increasingly dangerous creditors who had begun making threats against his physical safety. The evidence of Trevor's gambling debts came from private investigators I hired using my father's protected funds. These investigators were former federal agents who specialized in corporate security, and they uncovered a pattern of financial irresponsibility that stretched back several years. Trevor had been borrowing money against his expected inheritance from the estate sale, using the anticipated windfall as collateral for loans he couldn't possibly repay from legitimate sources. Celeste's secrets proved even more damaging to the family's reputation. My investigation revealed that her glamorous lifestyle was being funded through a cocaine distribution network that operated primarily within Denver's elite social circles. She wasn't just using drugs. She was selling them to other wealthy socialites at charity events and private parties, using her family connections to avoid scrutiny from law enforcement officials who were often friends of her stepfather. The evidence against Celeste included photographs from private investigators, financial records showing large cash deposits that couldn't be explained by legitimate income sources, and testimony from former dealers who had worked with her. The scope of her operation was sophisticated, involving multiple suppliers and a distribution network that generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual revenue. She had been using Victoria's charity events as cover for drug transactions, turning philanthropic gatherings into criminal enterprises. I used this information strategically to begin dividing my family against each other, feeding carefully selected details to each member about the other's criminal activities. Trevor learned about Celeste's drug dealing through anonymous messages that included photographs and financial documents. Celeste discovered Trevor's gambling debts through similar revelations that detailed exactly how much money he owed and to whom. The internal conflicts that resulted from these revelations were more destructive than anything I could have accomplished through direct confrontation. Trevor and Celeste began fighting constantly, each accusing the other of jeopardizing the family's reputation and estate sale plans. Victoria found herself mediating between her children while trying to maintain the facade of family unity that was essential to her social standing and criminal operations. Nathan Cross proved easier to manipulate than I had anticipated once I understood his fundamental character weaknesses. Despite his Harvard education and business success, Nathan was essentially a coward who avoided conflict and prioritized his reputation above all other considerations. When I presented him with evidence of Celeste's drug dealing and its potential impact on his own business relationships, he immediately distanced himself from her and attempted to repair his relationship with me. The revelation of Celeste's criminal activities to Nathan was delivered through a carefully orchestrated encounter at a business networking event. I arranged for him to overhear a conversation between two people I had hired to discuss Celeste's drug dealing in his presence, making it appear that the information was becoming public knowledge rather than a targeted revelation. Nathan's horrified reaction was exactly what I had hoped for, and within 24 hours he had ended his relationship with Celeste and was calling me to apologize for his betrayal. Nathan's return to my business orbit came with a substantial contract worth nearly $3 million, pushing my total liquid assets beyond $12 million for the first time. The project involved developing a comprehensive property management system for his expanding real estate empire, work that I could complete efficiently using the technologies I had already developed. More importantly, Nathan's renewed confidence in my abilities helped restore my reputation within Denver's business community. Victoria's desperation became apparent as her carefully constructed world began crumbling around her. The investigative journalists' preliminary articles had raised questions about the family's financial practices. Trevor and Celeste were at war with each other, and the estate sale was attracting unwanted attention from law enforcement agencies investigating potential money laundering operations. Her response was to accelerate the estate sale timeline, hoping to complete the transaction before the full scope of her crimes became public knowledge. But I had one more weapon in my arsenal that would prove decisive in the coming battle. Using information from my father's hidden documents, I had identified several of Victoria's business associates who had been complicit in her criminal activities. These individuals were vulnerable to prosecution themselves, making them willing to cooperate with law enforcement in exchange for reduced sentences or immunity from prosecution. The network of corrupted officials, charity board members, and business partners that Victoria had used to build her criminal empire became the foundation for bringing her down. Each person I approached with evidence of their complicity chose to cooperate rather than risk federal prosecution, creating a cascade of testimony that would ultimately destroy Victoria's entire operation. The woman who had seemed so powerful and untouchable just months earlier was about to discover that her empire was built on foundations that could crumble in a matter of days. With just 8 weeks remaining before the estate auction, the war between my family and me escalated into open warfare that threatened to destroy all of us. Victoria's realization that I possessed both the financial resources and the evidence necessary to challenge her authority triggered a desperate counterattack that would push our conflict beyond the boundaries of civilized behavior into something approaching actual violence. The public announcement of the estate auction drew immediate attention from Denver's media outlets, who had been following Miranda Chen's investigative series about corruption within the city's elite families. Victoria's attempt to sell the property quietly had backfired spectacularly, as the auction house's marketing campaign attracted dozens of serious bidders and turned what was supposed to be a private transaction into a very public spectacle. My wealth had grown to slightly over $12 million through the combination of my father's protected assets, the renewed business contracts with Nathan Cross, and several smaller projects I had completed using my new corporate identity. While this amount was substantial, it still left me $3 million short of the estate's likely sale price, requiring me to take significant financial risks to participate in the auction at all. Victoria's response to my growing financial power was to recruit allies from among Denver's most powerful and corrupt individuals. Her primary supporter was Richard Stone, a city councilman who had been accepting bribes from development companies for over a decade. Richard was a heavy-set man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and the kind of artificial smile that politicians perfected to hide their true intentions. He owed his political career to contributions from wealthy families like the Blakes, making him willing to use his official position to help Victoria maintain her control over the estate. Richard's assistance came in the form of legal challenges designed to prevent me from participating in the auction at all. He used his connections with the district attorney's office to suggest that my rapid accumulation of wealth was evidence of criminal activity that should be investigated before I was allowed to bid on major real estate transactions. The investigation was obviously frivolous, but it created legal complications that could potentially delay or prevent my participation in the auction. Celeste's world had completely collapsed following Nathan Cross's rejection and my revelation of her drug-dealing operation to key members of Denver's social elite. Her cocaine distribution network had been exposed, forcing her to flee to a rehabilitation facility in California to avoid immediate arrest. The wedding she had been planning with Nathan's anticipated financial support was canceled, leaving her with massive debts to vendors and no income source to repay them. The rehabilitation facility was actually a luxury resort that catered to wealthy individuals seeking to avoid the consequences of their criminal behavior rather than address their addiction issues seriously. Celeste's stay there was funded by Victoria's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain family unity, but even she was beginning to question whether her daughter could be salvaged from the wreckage of her exposed criminal activities. Trevor's situation had deteriorated even further as his gambling creditors became increasingly violent in their collection efforts. The Las Vegas crime families who had financed his betting sprees were not known for their patience with delinquent borrowers, and Trevor's face bore evidence of their displeasure in the form of bruises and cuts that he tried unsuccessfully to hide with makeup. His luxury car import business had collapsed entirely, leaving him with no legitimate income source to address his mounting debts. The pressure from Trevor's creditors extended to threats against other family members, including Victoria herself. Phone calls to the family home included explicit warnings that Trevor's debts would be collected from other Blake family assets if he continued to avoid payment. Victoria found herself under surveillance by dangerous men who viewed the estate sale as their only opportunity to recover the money Trevor had borrowed against his inheritance. My own situation became increasingly dangerous as Victoria's desperation led her to consider options that went far beyond financial manipulation or legal challenges. The threats against my personal safety escalated from anonymous messages to actual physical intimidation, including break-ins at my apartment and office that were clearly designed to frighten rather than steal anything valuable. The hired security team that began following me consisted of ex-military contractors who specialized in what they euphemistically called conflict resolution for wealthy clients. These men were professionals who understood how to threaten without leaving evidence, how to intimidate without crossing legal boundaries that would trigger law enforcement intervention. Their presence in my daily life was a constant reminder that Victoria was willing to use any means necessary to prevent me from disrupting her plans. The installation of a comprehensive security system around my apartment building and office became necessary for my survival rather than just my peace of mind. I hired bodyguards from the same private security company that protected other prominent business figures, men who had experience dealing with serious threats rather than just crowd control or basic protection services. The cost was enormous, but the alternative was potentially fatal. Miranda Chen's investigative series had reached its climax with a comprehensive exposé of Victoria's criminal empire that included detailed evidence of charity fraud, tax evasion, and bribery of public officials. The articles had generated calls for federal investigation and criminal prosecution, putting enormous pressure on Victoria to complete the estate sale before law enforcement agencies could freeze her assets as evidence in ongoing criminal cases. The public reaction to Miranda's articles was overwhelmingly supportive of my position, with dozens of people coming forward to share their own experiences of Victoria's manipulation and fraud. Former charity donors revealed how their contributions had been diverted to personal accounts, business partners described being cheated in real estate transactions, and even former friends shared stories of Victoria's calculated cruelty toward anyone who questioned her authority. However, Victoria's response to the negative publicity was to double down on her criminal behavior rather than accept responsibility for her actions. She hired expensive public relations consultants to spread counter-narratives about my alleged mental instability and criminal behavior, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to place stories in local media outlets that portrayed her as the victim of a vindictive stepdaughter's campaign of harassment. The final escalation came when Victoria attempted to have me committed to a mental health facility against my will, using forged medical documents and bribed psychiatrists to support claims that I was suffering from a psychotic break that made me dangerous to myself and others. The attempted involuntary commitment was thwarted only because my security team had been monitoring Victoria's activities and warned me about the plan before it could be executed. The legal papers for my involuntary commitment included testimony from Jerome Patterson claiming that my behavior had become increasingly erratic and threatening toward family members. The documents described alleged incidents of stalking, harassment, and threats of violence that were complete fabrications, but had been crafted carefully enough to seem credible to authorities who didn't know the true circumstances of our family conflict. My counter-response to Victoria's attempt to have me institutionalized was swift and devastating. I released copies of my father's recordings and letters to every major media outlet in Colorado, providing irrefutable evidence of Victoria's criminal behavior and my own legitimate claim to the estate. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive, generating enough pressure to force law enforcement agencies to begin serious investigations into Victoria's activities. The stage was now set for the final confrontation at the estate auction, where years of family conflict would be resolved in a single afternoon of competitive bidding. Victoria had exhausted her legal options for preventing my participation, but she still possessed enough liquid assets to compete seriously for the property. The auction would determine not just who owned the estate, but whether justice could triumph over corruption in a system that seemed designed to protect wealthy criminals from the consequences of their actions. The morning of the estate auction dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the prestigious Whitman Auction House in downtown Denver. The venue had been chosen specifically for its reputation and security capabilities, as media attention surrounding the Blake family scandal had attracted far more interest than anyone had anticipated. Reporters, photographers, and television crews lined the sidewalks outside the building, creating a circus atmosphere that perfectly captured the public's fascination with our family's dramatic destruction. I arrived at the auction house an hour before the scheduled start time, wearing a tailored navy blue business suit that projected confidence and authority. My legal team accompanied me, including the former federal prosecutors I had hired to ensure that Victoria's last-minute legal challenges would be swiftly defeated. The certified bank documents proving my access to $15 million were secured in a leather briefcase handcuffed to my wrist, a precaution that seemed melodramatic until I saw the dangerous-looking men positioned throughout the crowd. Victoria made her entrance like a movie star attending a premiere, stepping out of a black Bentley wearing a stunning cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her platinum hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup applied with professional precision, and her jewelry chosen specifically to convey wealth and respectability. But despite her glamorous appearance, I could see the strain around her eyes and the tension in her movements that revealed how much pressure she was under. The auction hall itself was elegant and intimidating, with rows of burgundy leather chairs arranged in front of a raised platform where the auctioneer would conduct the sale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled crowd of bidders, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a theater performance than a real estate transaction. The walls were decorated with paintings of previous auction highlights, including properties that had sold for tens of millions of dollars to anonymous buyers. Celeste appeared to be barely holding herself together, her hands shaking visibly as she took her seat beside Victoria in the front row reserved for family members. The rehabilitation facility had done nothing to address her underlying addiction issues, and withdrawal symptoms were clearly affecting her ability to focus on the proceedings. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the weight loss and pallor that marked her as someone struggling with serious health problems. Trevor's appearance was even more alarming, with fresh bruises on his face and a nervous energy that suggested he was expecting violence at any moment. His gambling creditors had apparently delivered another message about their impatience with his delayed payments, leaving him looking like a cornered animal desperate for any escape from his impossible situation. The estate's sale represented his only hope of avoiding serious physical harm from the dangerous men he owed money to. The auction house's security measures were extensive, including metal detectors at every entrance and armed guards positioned throughout the hall. The additional security was necessary because several of Trevor's creditors had made threats about attending the auction to ensure their interests were protected, raising concerns about potential violence if the bidding didn't produce enough money to satisfy their claims. Jerome Patterson sat in the second row behind Victoria, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact with anyone in my section of the room. The evidence Miranda Chun had published about his role in manipulating my father's will had destroyed his reputation and triggered disciplinary proceedings that would likely end his legal career. His presence at the auction was probably required by his professional obligations, but he clearly wished he was anywhere else. As the auction began, Victoria's legal team made one final attempt to disqualify me as a bidder by challenging the legitimacy of my funding sources. Her lawyers argued that money obtained through my father's hidden accounts should be considered part of the estate and therefore unavailable for bidding purposes. The challenge was obviously frivolous, but it created several minutes of tension as the auctioneer consulted with legal experts about the proper procedures. The ruling that allowed me to participate as a legitimate bidder sent visible shockwaves through Victoria's supporters, who had apparently been counting on legal challenges to eliminate me from the competition. Richard Stone, the corrupt city councilman who had been helping Victoria, looked particularly distressed as he realized that his political influence couldn't override clear legal precedents in favor of my position. The bidding opened at $10 million, immediately eliminating several potential buyers who had attended hoping to acquire the property at a discount. Victoria's opening bid of $10.5 million was met by my counter-bid of $11 million, establishing the competitive dynamic that would define the entire auction. Other bidders quickly realized they were witnessing a personal battle rather than a normal real estate transaction and began withdrawing from active participation. As the bidding escalated past $12 million, Victoria's confident demeanor began showing cracks of uncertainty. She had borrowed heavily against her other assets to reach this level, using dangerous lenders who would demand immediate repayment if she failed to acquire the estate. The pressure was visible in her increasingly aggressive bidding style and the way she whispered urgently with her advisors between each escalation. My bidding strategy was methodical and disciplined, increasing the price in measured increments while carefully monitoring Victoria's reactions to gauge her financial limits. I had learned during my months of business expansion that emotional decision-making led to costly mistakes, and I was determined to approach this auction with the same analytical mindset that had built my consulting empire. The moment that changed everything came when the bidding reached $13 million and Celeste suddenly stood up in the front row, her face flushed with anger and her voice shaking with emotion. "This is insane," she shouted at Victoria, loud enough for the entire auction hall to hear. "We're going to lose everything because of your stupid pride. She's not even really family. Why are we destroying ourselves to keep her away from Daddy's house?" Celeste's public breakdown revealed the extent of their family's internal conflicts and financial desperation to everyone present, including the reporters who had been documenting every moment of the auction. Her admission that their bidding was motivated by personal animosity rather than genuine desire for the property damaged their credibility with other auction participants and confirmed the narrative that had been building in the media about their corrupt motivations. Victoria's attempt to silence Celeste only made the situation worse, as their argument escalated into a shouting match that required intervention from auction house security. The disruption revealed details about Trevor's gambling debts, Celeste's drug problems, and Victoria's legal troubles that had previously been known only through media reports. Hearing these admissions directly from family members gave them a credibility that no amount of public relations spin could overcome. Trevor's breakdown followed immediately after Celeste's, as the pressure of watching his only hope for financial salvation slipping away triggered a complete emotional collapse. He jumped from his seat and attempted to physically disrupt the auction by grabbing the microphone from the auctioneer, screaming about how the bidding was unfair because I was using stolen money that belonged to the family. His outburst resulted in immediate arrest by the security personnel, creating a chaotic scene that perfectly captured the family's complete dysfunction. The final moments of the auction took place in an atmosphere of stunned silence as Victoria sat alone in the front row, her children removed by security and her supporters abandoning her to avoid association with the scandal. Her final bid of $14.5 million was met by my response of $15 million, pushing the price beyond her financial capacity and securing my victory in the most decisive way possible. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sound like thunder, officially transferring ownership of my father's beloved estate from the woman who had stolen it to the daughter who had fought to preserve his legacy. The moment felt surreal, as if years of conflict and struggle had suddenly crystallized into a single instant of absolute triumph. Victoria's face went completely white as she realized that her entire scheme had failed and that she would now face criminal prosecution without the financial resources to mount an adequate defense. The media coverage of my victory was immediate and overwhelmingly positive, with reporters describing the auction as a triumph of justice over corruption and determination over entitlement. The story of my fight to reclaim my father's estate became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever been underestimated or betrayed by family members they trusted. 6 months after that triumphant gavel fall, I stood on the wraparound deck of the estate's main house, watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and pink that took my breath away every single morning. The view was exactly as my father had described it during our final conversations, a daily reminder of the natural beauty that made all human conflicts seem small and temporary in comparison. The estate had been restored to its full glory, with every room reflecting the warmth and character my father had originally envisioned rather than the cold ostentation Victoria had imposed during her brief period of control. Victoria's criminal prosecution had proceeded swiftly once federal investigators gained access to the evidence I had provided. The charges included charity fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and elder abuse related to her manipulation of my father during his final months. Her trial had been a media sensation that exposed the corruption networks operating within Denver's elite social circles, resulting in multiple convictions that effectively dismantled her entire criminal enterprise. The judge's sentencing had been particularly satisfying, as Victoria received 8 years in federal prison along with orders to make full restitution to the numerous charities and individuals she had defrauded over the years. Her assets were seized to pay these debts, leaving her with nothing except the orange jumpsuit she wore during her final court appearance. The woman who had once commanded respect and fear through her wealth and connections had been reduced to just another number in the federal prison system. Jerome Patterson faced his own reckoning through disbarment proceedings that exposed his role in manipulating my father's will and facilitating Victoria's various criminal schemes. The Colorado Bar Association's investigation revealed a pattern of ethical violations spanning several years, including bribery, document falsification, and conspiracy to commit fraud. His law practice collapsed entirely, leaving him facing personal bankruptcy in addition to potential criminal charges. Richard Stone's political career ended in disgrace when federal investigators traced the bribes he had accepted to influence city council decisions in Victoria's favor. The FBI's investigation revealed corruption that extended far beyond our family's situation, encompassing a network of developers, contractors, and politicians who had been trading favors for personal profit for over a decade. His resignation from the city council was followed by criminal charges that would likely result in significant prison time. Celeste's journey toward recovery had been more complex and ultimately more hopeful than anyone had expected. The rehabilitation facility that had initially served as an escape from legal consequences eventually became the foundation for genuine healing from her drug addiction and the underlying emotional issues that had driven her destructive behavior. Her letter of apology to me, written during her 6th month of treatment, was filled with genuine remorse and insight about the toxic family dynamics that had shaped her choices. The relationship between Celeste and me had slowly begun rebuilding on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect rather than the manipulation and competition that had characterized our previous interactions. She was learning to take responsibility for her actions while I was learning to separate her individual choices from the family system that had encouraged her worst impulses. Our conversations during her supervised visits to the estate were tentative but genuine, offering hope that we might eventually develop a healthy relationship. Trevor's situation had required more dramatic intervention, as his gambling creditors had not been satisfied with apologies or payment plans. The dangerous men who had financed his betting sprees were eventually arrested by federal agents investigating organized crime activities in Las Vegas, eliminating the immediate threat to his physical safety. However, Trevor's recovery from gambling addiction proved to be an ongoing struggle that required intensive therapy and complete lifestyle changes. My decision to help Trevor despite his previous betrayals had been one of the most difficult choices I made during the aftermath of our family war. Ultimately, I concluded that enabling his self-destructive behavior would be cruel, while providing him with opportunities for genuine recovery honored the compassion my father had always shown toward people struggling with personal problems. Trevor now worked as a counselor at a gambling addiction treatment center, using his experiences to help other people avoid the mistakes he had made. The estate itself had been transformed into something far more meaningful than a mere luxury residence. Working with architects and designers who understood my father's original vision, I had created a memorial foundation that preserved his values while serving the broader community. The main house retained its residential character for my personal use, but the property also included facilities for hosting charitable events, educational programs, and support groups for families dealing with addiction and fraud issues. My business empire had continued growing beyond anything I had imagined possible during those desperate months of fighting for survival. Harmony Consulting Group now employed over 50 people across multiple offices, specializing in technology solutions for businesses that valued innovation and integrity over connections and inherited privilege. The company's success had made me one of Denver's youngest self-made millionaires, but more importantly, it had proved that success belonged to people who earned it through hard work rather than inheritance. The romantic relationship that had developed with James Fletcher, a successful environmental lawyer who shared my values and interests, provided the emotional stability and partnership I had never experienced with Derek or anyone else. James understood the importance of family legacy while also appreciating the courage required to stand up to corruption and abuse. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and shared goals rather than social status or financial considerations. The media attention surrounding my victory had gradually evolved from sensational coverage of family scandal to more thoughtful examination of systemic issues affecting wealthy families and estate planning. Miranda Chen's investigative series had won a Pulitzer Prize for exposing corruption in nonprofit organizations, while my story had become a case study taught in business schools about entrepreneurship, family dynamics, and ethical decision-making. The greatest lesson I learned through this entire ordeal was that authenticity and persistence will ultimately triumph over manipulation and entitlement, but only if you're willing to fight for your principles even when the cost seems unbearable. My father's legacy wasn't really about preserving a specific piece of real estate. It was about maintaining the values of hard work, integrity, and compassion that had built our family's success in the first place. Standing on that deck each morning, watching the sun rise over mountains that had witnessed countless human dramas play out across generations, I felt my father's presence in the wind and understood that his greatest gift wasn't the estate itself, but the strength he had given me to fight for what was right. The family that had mocked me at the auction had taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes the people who claim to love you reveal through their actions that they never deserved your loyalty anyway. The future stretched ahead with possibilities I was only beginning to imagine, but I faced it with the confidence that comes from surviving the worst that life can offer and emerging stronger on the other side. The estate would remain in the Blake family for generations to come, but more importantly, the values that had built it would continue guiding decisions long after I was gone. What do you think about families who turn against each other over money and inheritance? Have you ever had to stand up to people who underestimated you because of your age or background? Let me know in the comments below because your experiences might inspire others facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in the darkest moments. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that persistence and authenticity can triumph over corruption and entitlement. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the greatest victories come from refusing to let others define your worth or limit your dreams. May you find the courage to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible.